by now you all have a copy of the full version of the report, all 171 pages of it or something. We will not go through all of that. We don't have time, but I wanted to, again, kind of recap a few of the touch points on our lead up into that master plan. And then toward the end, what I have is kind of the more important recommendations and implementation strategies, which I think is kind of the meat of the whole report and sort of the next steps that come out of the report as well. So let me. Again, we've chatted a little bit about this too, but I just want to refresh everybody sort of what a Parks Master Plan is and why we do them, because it helps establish a long-range vision for the city, and it helps facilitate orderly and consistent planning. It allows you to budget and use your resources wisely and effectively as they become available. These documents are the key to many different grant funding opportunities, typically one of those boxes you have to check when pursuing certain grants. It helps us because we go out and we reach out to the public and engage with them and educate them about what this plan is and the portions of it. And then from that we get feedback from the community. So it kind of helps us prioritize community needs and also helps us identify parkland acquisition and opportunities that might come up and might be available for us. Helps us develop and administer the various parks and recreation resources, the programs, and their facilities. And then also helps us identify some potential public-private partnerships and opportunities with that as well. I wanted to mention too, in addition, this master plan doesn't really stand alone. It is a companion to the comprehensive plan, the Fairview Forward 2040 comprehensive plan, which started to go a little bit into some of the parks master planning, and so we take that a step further. So it definitely is a companion to that that master plan effort, and it will carry on a lot of the pertinent findings from previous master plan efforts, the ones that were done for for Bowie and for Historic Village and for Veterans Memorial. So again, all of those master planning efforts that have been done in the past, the idea behind this is that they aren't lost, that we can carry some of those elements forward and in and through this plan as well. And the other important part to this too is that these are typically things that get updated. It's usually on a 5 to 10 year basis as well. And so while it can kind of help provide a blueprint and a roadmap to how you might want to chart your course with regard to parks and recreation within the city, it is a flexible document. So it's not meant to really hem you guys into place to follow a certain path, because there are times, times change a little bit. Sometimes there's opportunities that come up where you might maybe want to prioritize something out of this master plan that maybe you hadn't thought about doing so early before. So it's meant to be a bit of a flexible document. And it has a lot of other added benefits, of course. It just helps help provide a foundation for your economic development. And as all parks and recreation and open space opportunities do, helps build a healthy community. We did go through a process, and obviously the deliverable is the master plan report that you've all had to look at. We went through a phase. It's been about, we're almost 8 months, I guess about 8 months into the process of it. And so we went through a period of data collection and analysis. So we looked at all of the existing recreation facilities, programs, needs, and it went to each one of the parks themselves to have a really good look at and identify and categorize your existing park facilities. We engaged with the public. We had 2 public meetings. One of them was a presentation in open house format, and the other one was an open house format. So we had 2 touch points with the public. There was also a website that was created as well, so if folks couldn't make it to the meetings or needed to kind of refresh their memory about something that had happened at the meetings, all of the boards and displays and information that was presented at those meetings was also on the website. And we also, I think there was also video taken and recordings taken during those, at least in the presentation portions of those meetings, that folks could get onto the city website to see as well. And then combining all that information with data collection and analysis, and benchmarking against other similar-sized cities throughout the nation, we create the master plan. So again, it's a comprehensive vision for the park system. It goes a little bit into the individual parks themselves and some improvements that could be made there. Any open space areas that might be available for potential future parks or other recreation opportunities. And then it gets into other ways of people to recreate and for green space and open space with greenways, other facilities, programs, and all of this is in context of its various, of its location, its proximity to natural resources or its ability to protect or conserve those. And then it also goes into a variety of constraints and opportunities. Go out again, Keith? No, I'm just doing this So in the data collection portion, here we go. I thought I had more detail on that. The data collection portion occurred between January and February of this year. And so we met with Historic Association, the Parks Director, obviously, American Legion, the Friends of Bowie. We did finally get our meeting in with them. It took a while to set that one up. And then fully reviewed all the previous master plan documents. And like I said, we created a project website, also with an online survey. I forgot to mention the survey as well. We had the 2 public meetings. The first one was on February 28th. Which that one was largely about just, again, making people aware of the master plan effort, what it was, what they were there for, and what they could expect to see from that effort. And then the second public meeting was following up from the information that they gave us and the input and some of their ideas and thoughts to kind of show that to them, largely through a basic list of some of the recommendations that the master plan was starting to point toward. And then we also had some conceptual plans for the individual parks, the existing parks as they are now. There we go. I don't even know why I'm clicking. And I mentioned we did some benchmarking. And so the National Recreation and Parks Association surveys about 10,000 parks throughout the United States. And they do that on an annual basis. And they ask a whole host of questions to these parks, everything from their programs and facilities and their budgets and where they spend their money and how much money they get in and their fees and everything. It's a massive, massive document, but it's a great benchmarking tool for us to use to compare Fairview's system with other cities of a similar size. So they break them down into population size. So Fairview falls in the category of those cities that are 20,000 in population or less. And so it's a little bit light here, so we can kind of see it a little bit. But the main categories that we looked at to benchmark fell into the park facilities and programming and staffing. And I won't go into each of those columns in great detail. So we summarized it a little bit with a little thumbs up or a little thumbs down as to how Fairview was comparing to some of these other cities. And there were points where Fairview really stood out and had a lot of really great features. And then there's other points where there might be some room for some improvement within the city, particularly with regard to neighborhood and community parks, their size category, and the amenities that are provided in them. It's somewhat lacking within the city as it is, at least within the city-owned parks. So I do want to make that clear that these are just looking at city-owned parcels and not those that might be owned or run by the county. So that was one of the bigger findings that we discovered during the benchmarking phase with regard to the types of parks that are existing in the system right now. Another big point I wanted to make with programming, we know that the programming used to be fairly robust within the city, and it has kind of fallen off in recent years. And so while I think there is a good history and backlog of programs that have been available, obviously they've tapered off in recent years. And so that was one thing where Fairview could maybe look to bringing back some of those programs to kind of boost them back up as far as with regard to comparing to other cities of a similar size. And then with regard to staffing, there's a fair bit of way that we could go to increase the staffing for the park system, both with regard to maintenance and with regard to programs and program directors as well. Other areas that we looked at in the benchmarking phase was with regard to budgeting. And so the budget for the parks at this point, again, compared to other similar cities, is definitely low. So there is some room for some improvement there. And again, the increased budgets will help with, obviously, with staffing needs and with programming needs. So that's where a lot of that can go. I know that at the onset of the project, of this master plan effort, it was made clear to really, and that even came through in the comprehensive plan as well, is that folks were really happy with the park system as it was currently, with some, probably with some room for improvement within the park system. So there was a focus more on maintaining and improving what you currently have, as opposed to maybe expanding and growing and adding more to it. And that's really responsive, I think, a lot to sort of being understaffed and under budgeted as well. So at least that lines up fairly well. It gets a little bit more difficult when folks are asking for more and more and more, and then obviously the budgets aren't there and the staffing's not there. So, but those two benchmarks kind of align with one another. So with regard to budget, there is quite a bit of room for improvement, both on operating expenditures and capital expenditures within the park system. And then with regard to agency funding, I left some of these there. I didn't have a whole lot of detailed information to really truly compare to it, but what I wanted to leave in here was at least where some other cities of similar sizes land within agency funding, if for no other reason, just to kind of give some goals for in the future, so maybe something to work toward. One of the key mapping components that we did during our data analysis and collection was performing a gap analysis. And so this takes the existing park system, and in this particular instance, we also included any of the county or county-owned facilities and the school systems as well. So this was taking a look at just the residents of Fairview and their opportunities on any level, scale, or ownership to get outdoors and to recreate. And so what we did is we took each one of those locations, and there is a radius. There's a typical either a 1 mile radius up to a 1 mile walking radius, and then there's like a 5 mile driving radius. And so we took each one of those parks and sort of blanked out that radius from each one of those parks. And so what you can see is within the limits of the city of Fairview, those areas shaded in red are the areas that don't currently fall within a 1 or a 5 mile radius of any existing recreation or open space or park facility right now. So this is a great way to kind of, to at least at a glance, be able to see if there are opportunities for land acquisition, where we might be able to fill in some gaps to make open space and recreation opportunities a little bit closer to all of the residents of Fairview, as opposed to certain areas. So obviously you can kind of tell there's the pocket up there by, like I-40, that's a little difficult maybe to have a park way up in there at that intersection, but particularly on the eastern side of Fairview, there could be some opportunities potentially in the future to provide some recreational opportunities for folks over there. So from all of this sort of data collection and input that we get from folks and stakeholder input as well, we developed a list of recommendations. And aside from we didn't want to create just a massive laundry list of things to do because that can be quite a bit overwhelming and it doesn't really have a great direction to it. So we broke it down a little bit more, and each recommendation comes with a particular action. So we tried to be detailed with what action needs to be taken, a justification for that action. We tried to identify a responsible party or parties that would be responsible for taking that action, and then also assigned a priority and a time frame to those. So while we think obviously all of the recommendations are important to implement, obviously we can't do everything all at once. So there has to be some point where you kind of say, okay, these are a little bit more higher priority items than others. So we did our best with the input that we got to prioritize those and then provide a time frame for each one of those. So priorities simply fell into a high, medium, and low priority. And then timeframes fell into a short term, a midterm, a long term, and then some of them are actually ongoing timeframes. So those were the basic kind of ways that we organized the recommendations. And there were 4 kind of main categories of recommendations. Those fell into general policy recommendations. And of that, we had 14 main recommendations with that. We had facility, so specific facility recommendations. There were 8 that came out of that. When it came to operations and maintenance, we had 12 recommendations. And then when it came to programming, there were 11 of them. So again, trying to break it down into some more bite-sized chunks and more manageable chunks to be able to tackle over time. A little bit small, but I tried to, this is all the same information that's in the report as well, but I organized it a little bit differently here for us to chat a little bit more about. I organized them based on high, medium, and low priority recommendations. And so, I'm more than happy I can read through, each one of these if there are particular ones that anybody had, questions or concerns about. But I did want to kind of go through these. The number that it's associated with them on the left-hand side just references the number that's in the master plan report, so it's a little bit out of order. Don't worry about that too much, but I just wanted to go over the basic facility action, or the basic action, the priority, and then the time frame that goes along with it. And so what I might do, I think what I'll do is read through them. And if there are any that that you have questions or concerns about or want to discuss a little bit more, you can just stop me and we can chat a little bit more about it and make sure everybody's on the same page. So these were the high priority actions. So these will be amongst all the different categories. So it might be a general policy action or facility or programming. So this kind of collects all of them together, but these are all the ones that we identified as high priorities. And they are in no certain order either. I do want to say that. This is just sort of basically how Excel sorted them for me whenever I said sort by high priority. So, so it doesn't make one more important than the other. One of them was to create a Tennessee Recreational Joint Facility Use Agreement with the school system. And so this would be a good way to maybe have the school facilities be available, obviously through a partnership and through written documentation of allowing people to use some of the school system facilities. Again, to maybe help fill in some of the gaps for recreational opportunities that don't exist currently. It could be a good stopgap for a bit. Increasing the parkland fee for development. It's a little bit low in comparison to other towns and cities in the area, so that might be a really great way as development comes in to at least get a little bit more dedicated recreational funding. Now there is a particular sort of a footprint or a radius where those recreation facilities need to go in based on that development that pays those fees. But again, it could be something that can help boost the budgeting and the funding available for the parks and recreation system. That is something that has to get run through the state too. So that's a little bit of a longer time frame that happens on those. Increasing the annual funding to the Parks and Recreation Department. Again, some of these other recommendations can help facilitate that, but that's just a general strategy and recommendation to make. The ecology report, the burn management plan, the trails maintenance plan for Bowie Nature Park, as well as a pond management and forest management plan. In our review of existing documents that were out there, those look to be fairly dated reports. Some of them are about 10 years old or so, so it's probably time to renew those and get those refreshed and updated. So we wanted to get that into the report as something on the to-do list. Reviewing and updating the current land dedication policy in preparation for any future development that may impact the need for additional neighborhood parks. Again, that goes along a little bit with the parkland fee for development as well. Creating a greenway easement policy that will allow for the use of maybe utility or private easements for public use greenways. Establishing development review procedures that require developers to describe how their projects achieve the city's vision and goals as they are described in this Parks Master Plan and even in the comprehensive plan as well. Creating a Greenway Master Plan would be a good recommendation. That was mentioned a fair bit in the public meetings as well, and can sometimes be really great ways of getting additional recreation facilities for folks just by virtue of them being linear in nature and connecting areas together. They tend to get quite a bit of use from a variety of people. So, but step one with doing that is creating a Greenway Master Plan to help you, target your efforts a little bit better on that. Identifying parcels that can be developed as future parkland or other protections to preserve plant and animal habitats. So this goes a little bit along with that gap analysis map that I showed, where you might have more targeted areas if there are opportunities that arise for future parkland development. Creating a cohesive signage and wayfinding master plan that help inform residents and visitors of the city's parks and recreation offerings. Incorporating ADA accessible trails, pathways, and facilities in existing and future parks. Again, that was mentioned a fair bit in some of the public meetings as well, is making sure that we accommodate all users of the parks and making sure we have facilities that do that. Maximizing our parking spaces in existing disturbed areas. This came through a bit when looking at Bowie Nature Park and ways that we might be able to improve within the footprint and the areas that we can in there. So there are some opportunities to maximize the amount of parking spaces that you can get within that footprint currently. This goes along a little bit with the Greenway Master Plan as well, but increasing pedestrian and bicycle connections to the existing parks. In the survey that we had sent out and in talking with folks at some of the public meetings, pretty much 99% of people drive to the parks as they are currently, just with the, either in lacking of sidewalk or bicycle infrastructure to allow them to do so. So that could be a combination effort between, transportation and also through greenways as well. Other programs that were discontinued in the Parks Department, maybe a good goal would be to pick maybe the top 5 community builders and revenue generators to offer those again. Again, I talked a little bit about some of the programs that had kind of fallen by the wayside in recent years, so maybe it might be, it might be worth taking a look at maybe the top 5 that were popular or good revenue generators and bring those back. Creating summer and after-school camps and classes for school-age children. This falls a bit into like youth and teen category. Again, this kind of stemmed a bit from the survey and from input that we got in the public meetings as well. Perhaps expanding options for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and other groups, maybe as potentially using the historic village buildings for meetings and events to help with some activation with that and to bring some more folks in there as well. Expanding the fishing pier space at existing lakes. So obviously this falls into Veterans Memorial Park for one, but potentially even in Bowie Nature Park as well, particularly at Veterans Memorial just because of the competitions that go on there as well. Hiring more parks and recreation staff to facilitate the daily work and reestablish the programming and events. Protecting and preserving Fairview's green space, vistas, and waterways. That was mentioned quite a bit. Just conservation and preservation in general was mentioned a lot and discussed a lot, both in the surveys and in the public engagement meetings as well. There's upgrading and replacing some of the existing structures in Bowie Nature Park. There's some mention of bridges and actually even some of the trails in general that might need some replacing or some updating as well. Ensuring that Bowie Nature Park has a detailed standard operating procedure and dedicated and committed funding to maintain the park to the standards that the citizens expect. Obviously, Bowie is the crown jewel for the city of Fairview, and it is very well loved, and people definitely that is the most popular park and the most visited park out of any of them in the system right now, and so people very much have an affinity to protecting and preserving Bowie Nature Park to the highest extent possible. And then again, this rolls into a few of the other ones too, but increasing the annual operating budget for the Parks Department, obviously with regard to staffing, programming, and maintenance needs as well. So that's the longest list out of them. But were there any ones that kind of particularly hit in a certain way that we wanted to discuss a little bit more? The report goes into more detail on those. I just kind of wanted to cover the main point of them. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think a lot of them have short-term time frame, high priority short-term time frame, which is pretty huge. Where we can start implementing some things and hopefully make a difference pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I didn't go over the time frame part of it. Most of them were either short to midterm time frames, as I guess high priorities would be. I'm not quite sure why you would put sort of a long time frame on a high priority, but yeah. But and a lot of them kind of sort of dovetail into one another as well. Like in doing one, you kind of solve one of the other ones as well. So. All right, and we can always come back to that too. But I will go over, so in the next one, Keith, we're gonna, medium priorities. Again, I hate prioritizing these because they're all equally important, I think, but you have to break it up somehow. So medium priority recommendations and implementation strategies. Create or review existing public, private, and public partnership contracts to ensure the cost of services provided to and the revenue that is received is equitable for all the parties. And so there may or may not be these contracts even in place, but if we have any of these partnerships that are going on right now, it could be worth a really good look at those contracts and partnerships write-ups to make sure that that everybody is benefiting from these equally. Developing a resource allocation and cost recovery policy for the parks and rec programs offered. This will just help with tracking and budgeting in the future as well, and maybe being able to kind of see where, what programs are more or less successful than others. Creating a citywide inventory of historic and cultural resources. Utilizing, this is Community Development Block Grant, is CDBG, funding insofar as possible to address the redevelopment of parks and playgrounds serving low-income families. And those are some really great grant opportunities that are available as well. So if there is a need that arises for that or an opportunity with that, those are really great. We work on quite a few projects that are funded through CDBG grants, and they serve a variety of needs, everything from acquiring land to redevelopment of housing areas, parks, and even sometimes it's even rolled into greenways as well. So there's a lot of opportunity within those grants for sure. Link and promote Fairview's key public facilities, cultural and natural assets with pedestrian and bicycle facilities. Again, this links pretty closely to the Greenway the Greenway recommendation that was earlier mentioned. Incorporate more gathering space options in the existing parks to maximize the usage. And this came through with some of the concept plans, particularly with in Historic Village, and even to an extent in Veterans Memorial Park too. Just creating some more of those spaces where people can gather and utilize those spaces will help maximize their usage. including restroom buildings in some of the existing parks. This was mentioned not only for veterans, but also for the future, the Elrod Road parcel as well. So in the concept plans that were provided in the report, there is locations for restroom buildings in those concept plans. Particularly when you're dealing with playgrounds for young children, that goes hand in hand. Working with some of the neighboring communities in Dixon and Bellevue and Thompson Station and Franklin, maybe to explore some opportunities to provide special events and programs in sharing, some of the facilities and park sites and even some of the manpower. Again, maybe establishing some partnerships and relationships with those, again, can kind of help create some mutually beneficial opportunities for each to use the different sites and to maybe utilize other folks' manpower and facilities. Developing health and wellness programs and opportunities for as large a segment of the population as possible. This came through in the survey where it was pretty much across the board where people there was a need for additional health and wellness programs. It wasn't just definitely targeted to older population or younger population. It was kind of across the board. So we thought that was well worth putting into the recommendations. Exploring cemetery preservation efforts at Mangrum Cemetery in Bowie Park. And developing wildlife viewing opportunities in the existing and future parks. Each one of the parks, well, with the exception of the Historic Village, has a pond or a lake in it and has some wildlife opportunities associated with that. So again, those can create some additional uses within the parks themselves, particularly when it comes to birding. That is a huge population that spends quite a bit of money on that hobby, and so there could be some opportunities there to utilize the facilities and the assets that you currently have. Implementing a work order tracking system. This was in talking with just basic maintenance and operations for the parks. There didn't seem to be an organized way of tracking different work orders, so that can kind of help keep certain people or certain departments responsible for their certain areas of the different parks by organizing work order tracking work orders. Requiring at least one city employee to hold a current certified playground safety inspection certification. Say that 5 times fast. Establishing policies and procedures for areas of responsibility between and among the public services and parks and recreation. This goes a little bit kind of along with a work order tracking system, but developing procedures and policies about how maintenance issues will be communicated, the various points of contact, and how the communication loop will be completed. So again, this is a operations and maintenance recommendation. And then along with that too, establishing a park maintenance and operations management plan. And then there's also some opportunities too about organizing community efforts to help maintain the park system with the various groups and organizations that are currently here and using the parks as well. There's a great passion for helping to maintain the park system. So there could be some opportunities there in the meantime. Most of these too, I didn't go over the timeframes for them. Most of these fell into either a midterm, a long, or an ongoing one. So these are ones that kind of stretch a little bit longer in time frame and have to kind of continually be sort of tapped up a little bit. But any questions on those? A lot, but shorter than the other list. And on that, we will go to, you can click the next one here, Keith, if you want. Oh, there we go. So the low priorities. Again, I hate saying it's a low priority, but having to establish some sort of hierarchy here. But it is the shortest list too. So, so developing partnering relationships with local associations and other recreation groups and providers in the region. Again, dovetailing a little bit off of the last one that I just mentioned about maybe getting assistance with maintenance operations in the parks. Renaming historical village to historic village. I did notice there was some inconsistency with naming of it, and so I do believe that it is intended to be called historic village, and I thought that might be something to put on there as something that needs to be formally done.
Well, when we went to the Tennessee Historic Association to put our, the school on the register and everything, the proper name is Triangle Historical Village. But, for the register it is.
Gotcha.
That's the proper name. But, I mean, consistency would be, and it not saying history, but consistency would be the best.
Yes.
Either, historical, but the proper name for it is Triangle Historical Village.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, but consistency is what's important.
That's exactly right. And that kind of came about a little bit. I mean, obviously not only just through our, ongoing, research and working, in the area, but then when we were thinking about, wayfinding and signage opportunities and how would something like that look, we went, oh, okay, yeah, something needs to be consistent with that one in particular. So yeah, maybe that one we can, revise that to saying, consistent naming, of the parks, and then keep it a little bit more broad and maybe a little bit less specific to that. Utilizing the lakes at Bowie Nature Park, at Veterans, and then again at the new Elrod parcel for environmental educational programs. Again, this dovetails a little bit into utilizing those opportunities, resource opportunities for maybe birding and other wildlife opportunities. They can also be environmental education opportunities as well. Promote conservation and environmental preservation within the city of Fairview wherever feasible. I think that one goes a little bit without saying, but definitely, not that it's a low priority, but I think one that doesn't take as much effort as some of the other ones, because it is something that is very passionate, that folks in town are very passionate about, but still worth putting onto the list as recommendations to continue that into the future as well. Perhaps partnering with a historical association to create walking tours of historic places within Fairview. That was mentioned, I think, in one of the public meetings as well. Some folks thought that might be a good opportunity to get more folks over into Historic Village and to other historic places within Fairview and start to help tie some of those together a little bit more. And these are some goals too. Again, this comes from that first one of those first tables that I showed, where there were still some blanks there, but identifying some goals for the city to aim for. And so the National Recreation and Parks Association, there's an average of 45% of all park and rec expenditures are spent on maintenance. And so that could be a goal for the city to achieve as time goes on. Again, that's kind of a long time frame to get that going, but definitely something that's worth setting a goal out there to work toward. And then last but not least, developing a naming rights policy for park amenities as well. So we didn't come across one that was part of any of the park facilities now, but we thought, if there are opportunities that arise where people are donating things or wanting things named, having a naming rights policy for any of those amenities that get brought in would be worthwhile having. So those were the last of the recommendations. Again, they go into grave more detail in the report, but I wanted to cover the main points of each one of them to see if there was anything that was overly glaring. Again, even with this, we tried to sort of prioritize these as a way of helping organize and strategizing, okay, what do we tackle first, as opposed to having one gigantic laundry list of items and things to do so that it wouldn't be overwhelming. This doesn't necessarily mean that just because something was identified as a medium or as a low priority, if an opportunity arises where you might be able to implement that a little bit sooner, I think by all means, you take that and you implement that sooner. But at least this kind of helps establish a little bit of a roadmap to help you lead your way through it as well. So. Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's the last slide. Last slide says questions and discussion, but So there we go for the Parks Master Plan report. Any other questions, concerns, things were left out? I don't know.
Can you speak to what you have discovered in regards to the conservation easement and, I hate to say limitations, but limitations?
Yep.
Because I think, there's a little confusion sometimes with the public. That is a nature park, and the intent of the nature park and what the conservation easement brings to that as far as what we can and cannot do.
Yeah, so in looking at Bowie Park, specifically in developing concepts and looking at, any types of improvements or additions to be made to the park, Bowie is broken up into the main part of Bowie, well over 500 some odd acres of it is the most restricted in terms of improvements that can be made to that portion of the park. So that is largely kept to just maintaining the trails and facilities that are there now. There is the ability to add additional buildings that would help to, it's all geared around promoting conservation and preservation of the park and of nature itself. So if there are buildings or structures that would be proposed to be built in there, they would have to obviously be run through the Tennessee Land Trust to get their okay to begin with. And it would have to be specifically geared toward preservation or education of people of the conservation of that land. There's a couple other parcels. These are the ones that are nearer to the road and to the entry of Bowie Nature Park that have different restrictions or allowances, if you will, within them. Again, it's all geared toward conservation and conservation of the natural resources that are within the park. And even in those areas where there were allowances for potentially if you wanted to put a new access road or an additional access road into the park or parking areas, in our looks at that, the topography in a lot of those areas was incredibly too steep and just not feasible to do some of those things. So when we developed a concept plan for Bowie Park as far as future improvements that could be made to the park, it largely just focused on the parcels that were nearest to the road up here and nearest to the entry. And with that came the addition of a library walking trail, the potential for a walking trail back behind the library, being two versions of a walking trail there. One, there's a potential to it, even in our kind of conceptual look at it, to have an ADA accessible path or loop that would be behind the library. Again, to accommodate and to let everybody enjoy the library and the park, and then a potential other trail that would extend up and back behind the library and into the park itself for those who might be a little bit more adventurous and want maybe a little bit more grade change and some climbing and descending in their walk or in their hike. So that was proposed as potential improvements to the park, as well as any of the nature playgrounds as well. And those can be anything from sometimes even the ropes courses are generally accepted and okay as not having a huge impact into the parks, and a great way again for educational opportunities as well. And then so that's kind of the portion over there that's nearest the library. There's a few other buffer portions of the of Bowie Park. Again, they're strictly just for buffers, so there's nothing you can do in there. They need to be preserved as a vegetative buffer. The other parcels that are near and around here, around City Hall, being for future municipal uses. So those we looked at as potential ways of creating additional connections for folks to get into the park by utilizing and activating the space around City Hall a little bit more. But yes, overall, the concept that we put together that is in the report was sent to the Land Trust to have them review to make sure that, at least in its conceptual form, was still staying true to the conservation easement language and the allowances or restrictions within that. And they did send back a letter, which again is in the appendix of this report, saying that in concept that those concepts were okay with them, but obviously anything that goes further into actually being constructed or built or done would obviously need to go back to them for review again to make sure that it was still staying within their within the conservation easement language. That's a long-winded way of saying there that there's some improvements that can be made in Bowie Park, but for the large part, it is to remain and stay as conserved, preserved land for its natural resources.
And for like dog parks, splash pads, stuff like that, we need to look outside of
Correct.
Bowie Park.
Yeah, correct. And even from a park planning standpoint as well, the location of it, those types of facilities being better located around more densely residential neighborhoods as well, so people can walk their dog to a dog park or take the kids to a splash pad or something, tend to get used a bit more than if there's something that has to be driven to all the time as well. So even if it would be allowed in conservation easement, recommendations just on a planning and a landscape architecture side of it it probably wouldn't be the best place for it anyway.
And your team has done a wonderful job with all of the concept plans. I did want to point out that even if we, it's going to be on the agenda to vote on tonight, even if it's voted for approval, these are just concept plans. I can speak to the historical village just because I'm one of the officers on the board of that. The concept plan is great, but our vision is completely, a lot different than that. So I just did want to point out, your team did a great job of pulling things together, but I did want to say, just for the record, that these are concept plans. These are not in concrete, even if we vote on them. This is just a vision, just something for us to look at, but it can be modified and massaged somewhat so that it's not later on. Well, that was voted on, and that's the way
Right.
it's got to be. It's a concept.
Yeah, and those concept plans were, while obviously thought put into them with regard to the layout, making sure that obviously the layout of it makes sense. Physically, you can fit some of those items on there. Obviously, we wouldn't put anything in a concept plan that, physically couldn't, be done or fit onto the site. That's what that concept plan was for, is to help give you, some sense of what could be fit on that site and how it might be able to be used to help fill some of those or address some of those things that were brought up in the public meetings and in the surveys about some of the uses that people were wanting to see out of these parks. So yes, much like the rest of the master plan report, something that's there to provide a roadmap and some guidance, but not necessarily something that each one of those things would need to be drilled down into further and further detailed and designed to get to something that would be constructible for sure. Yes.
Thank you. Anyone have questions from the board for Ms. Roberts? Commissioner Hall?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Roberts, we've got a lot of work to do as far as the three major parks with Bowie, Veterans, and Historical Village, with programming, maintenance, grants that's coming forward. But what about Elrod in the meantime? What should we focus on there as far as keeping it in the back of our mind that it is going to be a park? Mm-hmm. Should it just be maintained as far as cutting it, keeping the pond area more safer? Let's put it that way. What is your suggestion there in the meantime?
Yeah, in the meantime, I think, definitely just what you said, to maintain it and to keep the pond in its preserved a state as you can. I think there's probably even in the meantime some need to, either geotechnically or have, more research and study done on the soils and the topography and, to a certain extent, the geology in that area as well to really determine the suitability of that site for, potential uses in the future. I think that might help you strategize what could be done in there. In the concept plan, again, we showed, the potential to have largely, kind of an open grass, practice field area.
Right.
Understanding that there are some drainage issues in there and that the soil is pretty wet in there. But then the vast majority of the rest of the park being, the pond in particular, being preserved and utilized with, walking trails around for its, resource as a nature resource and a wildlife habitat as well. So anything that you can do in the meantime to maintain it to that extent would be beneficial to it. Are you thinking something along the lines with the safety of the pond as far as like, fencing around it or something like that?
Yes, ma'am. And, the wildlife, I understand there's a lot of snakes out there. Mm-hmm. That's what I've been told. I've never seen one out there myself. But that's, if we're letting public go, that's another thing we got to be able to have someone overlooking it from time to time to make sure, and at least some signage cautioning people, in my opinion.
Yeah, and some of the structures that are out there right now, while interesting, could, if people are just kind of, wandering around and having to check through and checking that out, could be, potential for, somebody to get, hurt or injured in some of those structures there. Okay. The buildings next to the silo. I think right now there's hay that's being stored in some of those as well, so it is being used at this point. But yeah, those could probably be maybe two potentials. I haven't seen any snakes out there either, but not to say they're not out there. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, saying that next time I go out there. Yeah.
There are very poisonous spiders out there right now.
God, don't say that. So,
well,
yeah, I know.
Thank you for your input.
We know that for a fact. So anyway, people just need to be careful.
It is nature. I mean, there could be signage if you wanted to put some signage up there to cover that. If there are some known things like that, that would be definitely beneficial as well. I think in the meantime.
Any other questions from the board?
It's a lot to digest, I know. It's really hard. It's hard to really...
Well, we appreciate all your team's work that you and your team have put into this document, and I know that it's you've put a lot of effort and work into it, so we appreciate it.
Thank you. No, we've enjoyed every bit of it, absolutely.
All right, so if there are no more questions, then we'll take about 10 minutes. So let's come back for our board meeting about 10 after.